Why do some men stay stuck for 10 years, while another man completely transforms his life in just 90 days? Same world, same internet, same opportunities. Yet one man keeps repeating the same tired routine every day, while another quietly builds a completely different future. So what is the real difference? It is not talent. It is not intelligence. And it is definitely not luck. The real difference is something much more uncomfortable. A simple habit most people know about, but almost nobody has the discipline to follow. And if you are honest with yourself for a moment, you will probably notice something strange. You already know what you should be doing. You have watched the motivation videos. You understand discipline. You know about habits, focus, productivity. The knowledge is not the problem. The uncomfortable truth is that most people are not lacking information. They are lacking action. And slowly, without realizing it, their daily routine begins designing a future they never actually chose. Days blur together. Weeks disappear. Months quietly pass. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question keeps returning. What if you are slowly wasting your potential? What if the real reason you feel stuck has nothing to do with opportunity and everything to do with the comfortable habits you repeat every day? Because nowhere is this more visible than in the way you start your mornings. Let me show you why through a simple story. A few years ago, there was a man named Daniel who felt exactly the way many people feel today. Trapped, tired, and painfully aware that his life was going nowhere. No degree, no powerful connections, no money saved. His job barely paid enough to survive. But within 90 days, something changed that completely redirected the direction of his life. Not because of a genius idea, not because of luck. It happened because he made one uncomfortable decision that most people hear about, agree with, and then quietly ignore the very next morning. And once you understand what happened to Daniel, you might realize something unsettling. The same opportunity to change your life might be waiting at the exact same time tomorrow morning. The real question is whether you will recognize it, or hit snooze and repeat the same year of your life again. Daniel was 32 years old, and on the surface, his life looked like the kind of life people slowly stop expecting more from. He worked as a night security guard at a warehouse on the edge of town. Every evening at 8 p.m. he clocked in. He walked the same silent hallways, checked the same locked doors, and stared out at the same empty parking lot under dim yellow lights. Then around 6 a.m., when the rest of the world was just beginning to wake up, Daniel walked home exhausted while the city slowly came alive around him. People leaving for work, children heading to school, coffee shops opening, and Daniel was heading home to sleep. His salary was small, barely enough to survive. He lived in a tiny one-room apartment with peeling paint on the walls and a thin mattress lying directly on the floor. But money was not the real problem. The real problem was the feeling that his life was moving in circles. Every morning on the walk home, he passed houses where families were eating breakfast together, children putting on backpacks, men stepping outside in clean shirts heading to work. Small, ordinary moments that looked like progress. And every time he saw those scenes through the windows, the same quiet thought returned. A question many people feel but rarely admit. Is this all my life will ever be? Because here is something uncomfortable that most people eventually realize. You can work extremely hard and still feel like your life is going nowhere. Daniel was not lazy. He worked long nights when his body wanted to sleep. He showed up every single day. But hard work alone does not guarantee progress. If the direction of your life never changes, effort slowly turns into exhaustion. And after enough time, that exhaustion turns into something even more dangerous. Acceptance. The moment a man stops trying to redesign his life and begins adapting to the one he already has. Daniel had tried to change things before. He applied for better jobs. Rejected. Most required degrees he did not have. He thought about learning new skills, but after working all night, his body demanded sleep more than ambition. So the routine repeated itself. Night shift. Sleep. Repeat. Weeks passed. Months passed. Years passed. And then something even more dangerous began to happen. The struggle started to feel normal. Because once survival becomes your routine, your mind begins protecting you with a comfortable lie. It tells you that nothing is wrong, that you are just waiting for the right opportunity, that someday things will change. But the truth is much harsher. Most people are not waiting for their life to change. They are slowly adapting to the life they secretly hoped would only be temporary. For years, Daniel lived inside that same quiet routine, telling himself that eventually something would change. But life has a strange way of forcing clarity on people who keep postponing their own potential. One cold Tuesday morning, just as Daniel was finishing his shift, his phone rang. It was his sister. Her voice was tense and rushed. "Daniel, you need to come home right now. Mom collapsed. She's in the hospital." The exhaustion in his body disappeared instantly, replaced by a sharp wave of fear. He caught the first bus back to his village. 3 hours later, he walked into a small clinic where his mother lay in a narrow hospital bed, weak and pale. The doctor explained she had fainted from exhaustion and stress. She needed proper food, rest, medication they could barely afford. Daniel sat beside her quietly as she slowly opened her eyes. She reached for his hand and spoke softly. But the words cut deeper than anything he had heard before. "Daniel, I am getting old. I don't have much time left. Please don't waste your life the way I wasted mine. Promise me you will find a way." Those words stayed in his mind long after she fell asleep. Because deep down he already knew the truth. He wasn't building a future. He was only surviving the present. When he stepped outside the clinic, the sky was still dark, but the night was beginning to break. A faint blue line stretched across the horizon as the first signs of morning appeared. And standing there in that quiet moment before sunrise, something inside Daniel shifted. Not sadness. Something sharper. Anger. Anger at how small his life had quietly become. Anger at the years he had traded for routine while calling it patience. And in that moment, he realized something painfully simple. If nothing about his daily rhythm changed, then nothing about his future would either. His life was not stuck because of bad luck. It was stuck because every day looked exactly the same. And only a few hours later, on the bus ride back to town, Daniel would discover something that would change everything. A few hours later, Daniel sat quietly on the early morning bus heading back to town. The sun had just begun to rise. Most passengers looked half asleep, heads tilted down toward their phones, scrolling through noise before the day had even begun. But across from Daniel sat a man who looked completely different. Well-dressed, calm, focused. He was reading a book as if the quiet morning belonged to him. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Park, a businessman in town known for owning several successful shops. What confused Daniel was not who the man was. It was the time. It was barely 6 in the morning. Why would someone who had already succeeded be awake this early? Curiosity pushed Daniel to speak. "Excuse me, sir, can I ask you something?" Mr. Park looked up from his book and smiled. "Of course." Daniel hesitated before asking the question that had been sitting in his mind. "Why are you awake this early?" Mr. Park studied him for a moment, then closed his book slowly. "Because this is the only part of the day that still belongs to you." Daniel frowned slightly. Mr. Park continued. "After 7 in the morning, the world starts owning your time. Your boss owns it, Your phone owns it. Other people's expectations own it. But before the world wakes up, there is a small window where your life is still yours to build. Daniel listened quietly. Mr. Park leaned forward slightly. Most people never use that window. They wake up already behind, already reacting, already chasing the day instead of shaping it. And they repeat that pattern for years without understanding why their life never moves forward. Then he looked directly at Daniel. "What do you do for work?" "Security guard," Daniel replied. "Night shift?" Mr. Park nodded slowly. "And when do you sleep?" "Usually from 7 in the morning until the afternoon." Mr. Park paused, then said something that landed harder than Daniel expected. "Then your life is built exactly backwards. You are asleep during the only hours when a person can quietly build a future. And you are awake during the hours meant only for survival. If someone lives like that long enough, they do not just feel stuck. They stay stuck." For a moment, Daniel said nothing, because suddenly something that had always felt vague inside his mind became painfully clear. Mr. Park wrote his number on a card and handed it to him. "Your future is not decided by how hard you work during the day. It is decided by what you do in the quiet hours most people waste. If you are serious about changing your life, start protecting the hours most people sleep through. That is where the next version of your life is built." The words Mr. Park said on the bus refused to leave Daniel's mind. Your future is decided by what you do in the quiet hours most people waste. At first, the idea sounded almost too simple. Could something as ordinary as early mornings really change the direction of a man's life? That question stayed in his mind the entire day. And by the evening, Daniel did something he had not done in a long time. He acted. He called the number on the card. The next morning, they met at a small cafe. Mr. Park looked at him carefully and gave a small nod. "So you actually showed up." Most people feel inspired for a few hours, then quietly return to the same routine. Daniel leaned forward. "I don't want my life to stay the same." Mr. Park opened a notebook and drew a simple house. "This is how most people live," he said. "They spend their entire day fixing the walls. Work problems, bills, stress, responsibilities. They react to everything." Then he tapped the bottom of the drawing. "But the foundation of the house, the part that determines whether the entire structure becomes stronger or collapses, almost nobody builds that." He wrote 2 numbers clearly beneath the drawing. 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. "These hours," he said calmly, "are where the foundation is built. And if your work schedule is different," Mr. Park added, "then you simply shift the clock. Protect 2 quiet hours after you wake up before the rest of the world starts demanding your time." Daniel listened closely as Mr. Park explained the structure. 2 hours every morning. That is enough to begin changing the direction of a life. He drew a line through the middle of the page. Hour 1 is for building something that increases your value. A skill, knowledge, something that can actually improve your future. Not entertainment, not scrolling, real learning. Then he pointed to the second half. Hour 2 is for building the man who will use that skill. Your body, your discipline, your thinking, exercise, reading, planning your day so the rest of your life moves with intention instead of chaos. Then Mr. Park wrote a few numbers. 2 hours a day, 14 hours a week, more than 700 hours in a year. He looked back at Daniel. That is almost 3 extra months of focused work every year. Most people complain they have no time, but they quietly waste exactly this window every morning. Then his tone shifted slightly. But this only works if you follow 3 rules. He raised one finger. First, there is no negotiation with the alarm. 5 means 5. Discipline begins the moment your mind tries to bargain. A second finger. Second, protect your sleep. People who say they want a better life but stay awake scrolling until midnight are not serious. Then the third. And the last rule is where most people fail. The first week will feel terrible. Your body will resist. Your mind will create excuses. That moment is the test. Mr. Park closed the notebook and slid it across the table. Follow this for 90 days. Not when you feel motivated. Every single day. Daniel looked down at the simple system in front of him. 2 hours. Every morning. 90 days. For the first time in years, the path forward was no longer vague. It was painfully clear. The next morning, Daniel's alarm rang at exactly 5 a.m., and his entire body immediately protested. Every muscle felt heavy. His eyes barely opened. And within seconds, a familiar voice appeared in his mind. The same voice that defeats millions of people every morning. Just 1 more hour. You deserve the rest. Start tomorrow. For a moment, his hand moved toward the phone. His thumb hovered over the alarm. 1 tap and he could disappear back into sleep. And that quiet negotiation between comfort and discipline is where most people lose. But then another image appeared in his mind. His mother lying in that hospital bed, asking him not to waste his life. That memory cut through the fog of sleep. Daniel forced himself upright, turned off the alarm, and stood on his feet before his mind could argue again. The first morning felt brutal. His eyes burned with exhaustion as he sat at a small table watching tutorials, trying to understand spreadsheets and basic accounting. The information felt slow and confusing. His mind drifted constantly. His body begged him to go back to bed. And this is the part nobody likes to admit about discipline. The beginning feels terrible. The first week is not inspiring. It is not motivational. It is uncomfortable, lonely, and frustrating. Because when you begin breaking an old routine, your brain treats the change like a threat. It starts negotiating, searching for excuses, trying to convince you the old life was not so bad after all. And this is exactly where most people quit. Not because the system does not work, but because discomfort feels like proof that something is wrong. Daniel felt that pressure almost every morning during the first week. Some days he stared at the clock, waiting for the hour to end. One morning he even thought, maybe this is pointless. But then he remembered Mr. Park's words. The moment your mind begins bargaining is the moment discipline begins. So the next morning he did it again. And the morning after that. And the one after that. Slowly something began to shift. The fog in his head started clearing. The tutorials began making sense. Simple formulas turned into understanding. The quiet morning walks that once felt like punishment slowly became moments of clarity. Then something unexpected happened around the third week. One morning, Daniel woke up 2 minutes before the alarm rang. For a moment he lay there confused. Because the old version of him would have been desperate for more sleep. But now his body had accepted the rhythm. And in that quiet moment, Daniel realized something powerful. He was no longer forcing himself to wake up at 5. He had become the kind of person who wakes up at 5. By the end of the first month, something inside Daniel had clearly shifted. The man who once dragged himself through mornings was now stepping into them with intention. Every day at 5, he sat down at the small table in his apartment and continued learning accounting and Excel. At the beginning, it had felt confusing, almost overwhelming. But slowly, the patterns began to click. Formulas that once looked like random symbols started turning into tools he could actually use. Small victories began appearing. Finishing a lesson faster. solving a spreadsheet problem without help, understanding concepts that once made him feel lost. None of these wins were dramatic, but they carried a powerful psychological effect. For the first time in years, Daniel could see evidence that his effort was producing progress. And that feeling does something important to a person. It replaces doubt with momentum. His morning walks began changing too. The quiet streets that once felt empty now felt peaceful. While most people were still asleep, Daniel often felt like he had already lived an entire productive day before his shift even began. And then something interesting started happening. The changes inside him began showing up in the outside world. At work, his coworkers started noticing small differences. Daniel looked more alert, more focused. He carried himself differently. One night, a colleague asked, "You seem different lately. What changed?" Daniel smiled slightly. "I started building my life before the day begins." By the time the third month began, the change in Daniel was impossible to ignore. What started as a painful routine had slowly become a rhythm that shaped every part of his day. Waking up at 5 was no longer a fight. It was simply how his life worked now. And this is the strange part about discipline that most people misunderstand. In the beginning, it feels slow and invisible, almost like nothing important is happening. But beneath the surface, something powerful is quietly compounding. Skills sharpen, thinking becomes clearer, confidence grows, and eventually, those invisible improvements begin producing visible results. That moment arrived on the 87th day of his new routine. One afternoon, his supervisor called him into the office. The warehouse manager was sitting there as well. The supervisor spoke first. "We've been paying attention to the inventory system you created." The manager leaned forward. "You solved a problem we struggled with for years." Then he said something that changed everything. "We are expanding our accounting department." And your name came up immediately. "If you want the position, the job is yours." Day shift. Office work. Double his salary. 3 months earlier, he had been a night guard convinced his life might never change. Now the same company was offering him a completely different future. That night, Daniel called Mr. Park. "It worked," he said. 90 days, I never missed a morning. And today they offered me a new position." Mr. Park laughed softly. "Good. But do not misunderstand what just happened. The promotion is not the real reward." Daniel stayed silent. "The real reward," Mr. Park said, "is that you proved something to yourself most people never prove. You proved that you can change who you are." Daniel's story might sound extraordinary at first, but the truth is much simpler and much more uncomfortable. There was nothing special about Daniel when he began. The only difference between his old life and his new life was one decision repeated every morning before the world woke up. And that is the part most people do not like to hear, because it means the distance between the life you have and the life you want may not be some complicated mystery. It may simply be the habits you repeat when nobody is watching. Tomorrow morning, your alarm will ring, and a small decision will appear in front of you. It will look insignificant, but hidden inside that moment is the direction of your future. Because 5 years from now, you will either be grateful that you started, or you will still be wondering why nothing changed. And that is the real secret behind the 5 a.m. habit. It is not about waking up early. It is about becoming the kind of person who refuses to waste the hours that can quietly build his future. Because the men who change their lives are not the ones who wait for the right moment. They are the ones who wake up and create it. If this story meant something to you, consider subscribing for more videos like this. And if you believe more people should hear messages like this, leave a like and share the video. Sometimes the right idea at the right moment can change someone's life. I'll see you in the next story.